Welcome to the Theology Made podcast. I'm Jordan. Today, we're going to look at how Christianity created universities. It's the year 1096. You're trudging along a muddy road in a small English town called Oxford, a place known mostly for its river crossing and its occasional brawls between townsfolk and traveling clerics. The air smells like wood smoke and damp wool. Chickens roam freely, merchants shout over crates of fish. Nothing here looks revolutionary. But then you hear it. Latin. Not in a church, not in a monastery, but in the open air. A crowd of young men gathered beneath a timbered roof, their cloaks wrapped tight against the cold, debating at the top of their lungs. You step closer. Inside a cramped hall, a master sits on a raised chair, parchment in hand, lecturing on Aristotle. Students lean forward, scratching notes onto wax tablets, interrupting him with questions he can barely finish answering. Outside, more students huddle in circles, arguing about logic, theology, grammar, their voices rising and falling like waves. It's not orderly, it's not quiet, it's not even officially sanctioned, but something unprecedented is happening here. A community of learners is forming. Not just monks, not nobles, not isolated scholars buried in monasteries. These are ordinary students gathering to study regularly, voluntarily, publicly. Oxford isn't a university yet. Not officially, not legally. But right here in this humble town, among cold halls and crowded debates, the seeds of the university, as we know it today, are beginning to take root. And no one in 1096 realizes that this messy, noisy, candlelit experiment is about to reshape the entire intellectual world. If you lived in medieval Europe and you wanted to learn something, anything really, you had two choices: become a monk or become wealthy. That's it. No public schools, no high schools, no colleges, no student loans, no undeclared majors. Learning was either for the elite or for the religious, and for centuries, the center of learning was the monastery. Monks copied texts by hand, monks preserved scripture, monks rescued ancient philosophy from oblivion, monks kept libraries alive, while the rest of the world tore itself apart, and monks brewed some of the best beer around. But eventually something unexpected happened. The monasteries got too good at learning. People wanted in. Merchants, lawyers, clerks, priests, everyone suddenly wanted access to knowledge the monks had been guarding for centuries. And that hunger set the stage for something new. By the 11th century, cities like Bologna, Paris, and Oxford were buzzing with energy. Commerce booming, trade routes opening, church courts expanding, and everywhere culture grew, ideas grew with it. But ideas need a home, and so the church did something unthinkable for the time. It created a place where anyone, not just monks, could study sacred and secular subjects together. The cathedral schools were first, built around bishop seats, and these schools taught scripture, grammar, and theology, but they also slipped in subjects like law, logic, and medicine. And the reason is because the church believed all truth is God's truth. And if God created the world, then studying the world, its laws, its logic, its order, was not a threat to faith. It was an act of worship. So these cathedral schools blossomed, and more students came than they could handle. Teachers grew famous, crowds gathered to hear them lecture. Students followed the best professors from city to city like academic groupies. And soon the church realized it needed something larger, something more structured and official. So it created a new kind of institution, the university, a guild of masters and students. And here's what made the medieval university radically different from anything before it. The first, it assumed the world was orderly. Not chaotic or random. It's not a playground of the gods. Medieval Christians believed the universe had a rational structure because it came from a rational creator. And that meant nature could be studied, laws could be discovered, ideas could be debated, truth was not fragile. The second thing is it assumed human minds could understand reality. Not perfectly, but at least in some meaningful way, because the human mind was made in God's image. And that belief, unique to Christian theology, became the foundation of the scientific method as we know it. 3, it assumed questions were not dangerous. Doubt was not seen as rebellion, inquiry was not treason. And it's why universities allowed debate between Augustine and Aristotle, theology and law, scripture and philosophy, reason versus revelation. Not in a chaotic way, but in a confident way that the truth didn't need protection, it needed pursuit. And the medieval university had 4 core faculties, 4 pillars of learning that held up the entire intellectual world. And each one reveals something about how Christians understood both God and reality. The first, theology. In the medieval mind, theology wasn't just one subject among many, it was the center of gravity. They called it the queen of the sciences, not because it bullied the other subjects and not because it controlled them like a tyrant, but because it ordered them. The way the sun orders the solar system, the way a compass orients a traveler. And theology answered the biggest questions. Why does anything exist? What is a human being for? What is good, true, beautiful? And every other discipline plugged into those answers. Physics described how things work. Theology explained why. Medicine healed the body. Theology told you the body mattered. Law governed society. Theology defined justice itself. Theology didn't limit knowledge. It gave knowledge meaning, purpose, direction, a horizon to aim for. And this is why in medieval universities, every student, no matter what their specialty was, eventually took theology. Because to know the world, you first had to know what the world was. Second was law. If theology was the mind of the university, law was the skeleton. And there wasn't just one kind of law. You had Roman law, the ancient legal tradition that shaped empires, property, contracts, inheritance, all systematized by Christian scholars. Canon law, the laws of the church, marriage, sacraments, clergy, morality, discipline. You had civil law, the day-to-day legal framework of cities, merchants, guilds, and trade. Together, these three streams created something revolutionary, a society that could function on principles and not personalities. Law students trained to reason, debate, argue, interpret. These were skills the medieval world desperately needed. Because without lawyers, you can't run a church, a city, a kingdom, or a civilization. Christianity didn't just preach the gospel, it built legal systems that made culture flourish. And the university was where those systems were forged. Third was medicine. Medicine in the medieval university wasn't mechanical. Doctors didn't study the body like it was a broken engine. They studied it as a sacred creation, a marvel of design, a sign of divine wisdom, a vessel of life breathed into dust. And their work came straight out of Christian conviction. If humans bear God's image, then healing them is holy. And this is why hospitals grew out of monasteries, nuns became some of the earliest nurses, Christian charity drove medical care. Universities placed medicine alongside theology, and medieval medical students studied anatomy, humors, herbs, diet, circulation, primitive by modern standards, but groundbreaking in their time. And they saw sickness as something to be treated, not punished, that bodies, they're worth saving, they're not disposable. And in doing so, they laid the foundations for Western healthcare. And then fourth was the liberal arts. Before you could study theology, law, or medicine, you had to learn how to think. Enter the liberal arts, not electives or side courses, but the core curriculum of the medieval university. And they were divided into two groups: the trivium, which is how to think; grammar, so not boring sentence diagrams, but the architecture of language itself. And what this did is it taught clarity, it taught precision, it taught the power of words. And then logic, how to argue without nonsense, how to detect bad reasoning, and how to follow an idea to its conclusion. And then rhetoric, how to persuade an audience, how to communicate truth beautifully and compellingly. So grammar gave you structure, logic gave you clarity, rhetoric gave you your voice. And then the quadrivium, how to see the order of the world. First you had arithmetic, numbers, patterns, proportions. Think of it like the fingerprint of divine order. Then geometry, space, measurement, the logic behind architecture and creation. And then interestingly, music. But not performance, the mathematics of harmony. To medieval Christians, music was math made audible, a glimpse of the order behind everything. And then astronomy, the movement of the heavens, the rhythm of seasons, the calendar of the church, the dance of stars that seemed to whisper of a creator. And together, these two did one thing. They trained the mind to be human, to think clearly, speak truthfully, calculate accurately, imagine boldly, reflect deeply, and wonder wisely. And more than preparing you for a job, they prepared you for life. And the medieval university wasn't created to pump out workers. It was designed to feed the economy. It was built to shape souls, to cultivate wisdom, to form character, to teach people how to seek truth, recognize beauty, and do justice, and live well. And that vision, the Christian vision, is the root of every university that exists today, even the ones that have forgotten where they came from. But here's the thing. The reason universities could exist at all was because the church protected academic freedom. Popes granted university charters, which meant kings couldn't shut them down, nobles couldn't tax them, bishops couldn't control them, cities couldn't force their curriculum. The Pope's protection let scholars debate openly without fear of political retaliation. And if a professor got in trouble with local authorities, he could simply appeal to Rome. And Rome, shockingly, often sided with the professor. Because theology, it thrives on truth, not censorship. And so Oxford became a magnet for thinkers. Paris became the center of theology. Bologna became the law capital of Europe. And students traveled hundreds of miles on foot to study in these places. Many slept on floors, ate one meal a day, lived in cold, cramped rooms. And the reason? They were hungry for knowledge. And the church had created the only place in the world where you could find it. Professors wrote commentaries, students debated in public squares, ideas collided, arguments sharpened, and slowly, painfully, but I think brilliantly, the university tradition began to reshape Western civilization. So why did Christians do this? Why create a system that trained people to ask hard questions? Why take theology, the crown jewel of the faith, and place it inside an institution swarming with skeptics, philosophers, scientists, and legal theorists? Why risk confusion, disagreement, debate? It's because Christians believe something that the ancient world never dared to believe. Truth is unified, it's consistent, and truth is not afraid of questions. If God made the universe, then studying the universe will naturally lead you towards Him. If God made the human mind, then using your mind is not rebellion, it's obedience. And if God is truth, then every truth is God's truth. The university was not created to challenge Christianity. It was created because Christianity believed truth was worth the challenge. Today, universities may seem secular, distant, even hostile to faith, but their foundation's unmistakably Christian. The lecture hall is a Christian invention. The degree system is a Christian invention. The idea of objective truth is a Christian inheritance. Academic freedom came from papal protection. Science grew out of theological confidence. The liberal arts were shaped by monastic discipline. The entire concept of higher education, it is rooted in Christian soil. So the next time you walk onto a college campus, past brick halls and grassy quads, and lecture rooms filled with questions, remember, you're standing in the Cathedral of the mind, built by Christians, funded by faith, fueled by a belief that God made a world worth studying and minds capable of understanding it. And that's the real reason Christians created universities. Not to escape the world, but to explore it. If this episode opened your eyes to how much of your world was shaped by the church, you'll love my Theology Made Simple course. I'll teach you the same way the first universities did. The link is in the show notes.